Mr. President, Madam Secretary of the General Council of Europe, Madam Secretary of the Parliamentary Assembly, members of the Parliamentary Assembly, ladies and gentlemen. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. These are the words of Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor and Nobel Peace Prize winner. His experience of the horrors of the Shoah and the Second World War made him a lifelong believer in the need to stand up for human rights, regardless where violations occur and to whom. Wiesel was convinced that when human rights are violated, that this is a warning signal for what there is to come. The Council of Europe was founded in 1949 with exactly this in mind, as an early warning mechanism against human rights violations, to prevent new wars, human suffering, and tyranny on the European continent. And as a common European home for democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. For all Europeans, protected by strong walls formed by the Convention on Human Rights and the Court of Human Rights. The Council also comprises more than 220 conventions and treaties. And probably, if we are all frank, no one in this room, maybe except for the President and the Secretary General, could name all of them. And feel free to do the math on how many bilateral treaties it would need to replace them. With all these conventions, with the European Court of Human Rights and its monitoring mechanisms, the Council is setting the highest human rights standards. Through its rulings, the Court has strengthened women in their fight against domestic violence. It has bolstered the freedom of the press, and it has obliged us as governments to build polling stations that are accessible to persons in wheelchairs and with other disabilities. Moreover, the Court is currently pushing towards intergenerational justice in groundbreaking cases, for example, on the climate crisis. This direct access that individuals have to an international human rights court is unparalleled in the world. And that is why Germany has made available additional means for the court. And we call on others, and actually I would say it very blunt and open. We urge others to step up their support as well. Because if we want a court to run in the future, it needs obviously sufficient financial sources. And let me be clear, the Court of Human Rights is something we can be more than proud of. However, we are also committed to social conventions and resolutions, to a fair income. And we cannot expect that with more cases at the core, less judges would do the same amount of work. So it's up to us, the government, to strengthen the court, our Court of Human Rights, also in the future. The court reflects our convictions as member states of the Council of Europe that our governments must put their people's fundamental rights first. Still, if we are honest to ourselves, we also probably, I would say again, all of us would have to admit that before we became parliamentarians and politicians, many of us might indeed had sometimes a bit confusion if they would have to explain the difference between the Council of Europe and the European councils. And did we actually all know that the anthem of Europe and the European flag, with its 12 stars, were first used by the Council of Europe? The President this morning reaffirmed me again that they do not really care about copyrights in this regard, as long as the EU also copies or finally ratifies the European Convention on Human Rights. Without joking, I believe that this is actually not a bad thing, even though as a journalist you can write, whoa, people confuse the Council of Europe and the European Council, and it shows the neglect of the Council of Europe. I think this is not the true story. I believe that younger people, and even people of my generation, I'm being 42 years old, having the incredible luck to have lived my whole life in peace and not in a dictatorship, because being born in Western Germany, we took freedom and democracy for granted, but not because we neglected freedom and democracy, but because our ancestors built this Council of Europe, and we all believed that we could live in this house of freedom, of peace, all together forever. So the crucial point is not whether the Council of Europe or also the OSCE has played a strong enough role in the past. The crucial point is what we are doing now. Now, when our European peace order, when the Council of Europe, the OSCE, is being under attack. This is our responsibility as politicians of our generation of this time. Because Russia's war of aggression is not only a war against Ukraine, it is a war against the common European peace order. So what we have done in the last months was crucial. And I would like to thank and applaud you also here in the Council of Europe, that you have shown Putin that he would never succeed in destroying Ukraine, but that he would also never succeed in destroying our common home of peace, the Council of Europe. But we have to be also self-reflective, because we have seen also what we neglected in the past too much is the early warning system of this Council of Europe. Because when human rights are undermined or disregarded, these are early warning signs Wiesel was talking about. And ladies and gentlemen, we have such warnings have been there in the past. When our friends and partners in Central and Eastern Europe, and in particular in the Baltic, pointed to Russia's aggressiveness, especially my country did not listen carefully enough. When we saw the show trials against Alexei Navalny, when we saw Russia ignoring judgments by the European Court of Human Rights calling for his release, and when we saw Russia's refusal to sign the Istanbul Convention and drastically curbing women's rights, these were all early warning signs, and we didn't see them. We didn't take action. As early as in 2017, Russia changed its laws on domestic violence so that men, husbands, partners, who beat up their wives would get in legal trouble, not while they are beating their wives, but the law has been changed. You would have to beat your wife since 2017 in Russia repeatedly. She has to be sent to hospital, and then the criminal law would act. That should have sent a clear and loud warning, because women's rights are a yardstick for the state of our democracies. When women aren't safe in a society, no one is safe. And when human rights are not respected in a country, then ultimately peace and freedom are at risk. President Putin has made this obvious. His language of rape for years, his repression at home goes hand in hand with his attempt to destroy Ukraine and our common European peace order. That is why I'm convinced that today the Council of Europe, as an early warning mechanism, is more important than ever. Its work for human rights makes a crucial difference to people across Europe. And to be clear, Europe is bigger than the EU. The Convention on Human Rights and the Council of Europe, they create a common European home for human rights and democracy for almost 700 million people. 700 million people who, thanks God, do not look alike, do not dream alike. They have different traditions, different histories, and different plannings for the future. But 700 million people, all united by their firm belief in fundamental rights. I had the privilege of seeing what this actually means, fundamental rights. When I spoke with teenagers in Kharkiv earlier this month, I was at different spots in Kharkiv and saw all the destruction. But actually what touched me most was my last stop at the heating point set up with so much care, and I would even have to say love. We were sitting around a table, there was a warm stove, and we were offered tea and cookies because it was minus 12 degrees outside. And I was sitting with different teenagers. Their school had been destroyed in the early beginning of that war. So I was asking them, where do you go to school? And they looked at me and said, our school has been destroyed. So they haven't been to a school because not only their school had been destroyed, but many schools in Kharkiv had been destroyed for almost an entire year because going to a makeshift school would be too dangerous. Because Kharkiv is a place 35 kilometers away from the Russian border. So if there is a rocket being targeted at the Kharkiv school, like before, there is no single air defense system which can prevent that this rocket would not hit their school again. They have 45 seconds to hide, and 45 seconds is obviously way too little to hide. You can only pray. So I asked them, what do you do if you're not going to school? And the impressive thing is that even in a partly destructed town, they have online teaching in classrooms. And I said, what are you doing otherwise? If you have 45 seconds only to pray because you cannot hide. And one of the girls told me, well, I used to play volleyball, but obviously also my volleyball pitch is being destroyed. And I'm 16 years old. I normally hang around with friends, but also this is not possible anymore. So actually, even though these school children, these teenagers, survived, they are not living a normal life like teenagers. They hide every day and night, praying that the next rocket will not hit them. So when I asked them, why did you leave? Why didn't you leave? This girl, the 16-year-old, said, well, I left with my parents to Italy. But obviously, she came back. And I asked her, why did you come back here? Coming back to your neighborhood of Saltikva, which was wiped out by the bombs. When we were driving through them, you could see still the coffee table in a house which has been partly destroyed. People just drinking coffee before the rocket hit their home. She simply said, with tears in her eyes, because this is my home. Even though my home is now a prison, because I cannot go to school, I cannot go to volleyball, I cannot go out with my friends anymore. This is my home. This is where I want to be. This is where I want to survive if I'm not dying. So the only thing this girl and all her friends were asking for is to live a simple normal life again, an everyday life where you go out as a teenager to meet your friends, to play volleyball, and to go to school. It is this girl's simple wish for a life in freedom, in peace, and with basic human rights that brings home to me what our agenda here at the Council of Europe is all about. Or, if you want to put it big, as German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer said it here at the Council of Europe when it was founded. The Council of Europe is the soul of Europe. It is our duty to keep this soul alive. That is why we are here. That is why I'm speaking here as the German Foreign Minister. That is why you are here. And you are coming back every month to work for our European soul, to solve it for every person in Europe, for the teenagers in Kharkiv. To make sure that we are not missing the warning signals of human rights violation that can lead to violence and war. And to assure that the fundamental freedoms of women, men, and children are better protected every single day. Their rights to live a life in dignity and freedom. Yes, I believe we need the Council of Europe today more than ever to put the power of those rights above the power of might. President Putin wants to drag Europe back in a past dominated by power politics, where states can trample on individual rights in the pursuit of imperial glory, where rulers dispose of their citizens like pawns in geopolitical chess games. That is why, in the face of Russia's war, neutrality was not an option. We had to make a choice between injustice and justice, freedom and oppression, between standing on the side of the aggressor and standing on the side of the victims, the teenagers in Kharkiv. And we did. The Council of Europe, we all together adopted a clear and united stance against Russia's war. We jointly voted to expel Russia from the Council. And we made clear that the Council stands with the brave women and men and children of Ukraine who are fighting for their country and their freedom, but also for democracy and human rights on the entire European continent. Because the Council is not a geographical concept. Because the Council unites us in the concept of human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. But we have also to critically assess why we did not fully recognize the early warning signals. This is why at the last meeting of the Committee of Ministers in Turin in summer, I advocated for a fourth summit of the Council of Europe that will now take place in Reykjavik under the Icelandic presidency. At this upcoming summit, we will have an opportunity to set up the Council for a new era in European history. We know that institutions are only as strong as the political and financial support they get. And that means we also have to give the Council the financial and other means it needs, as I said in the beginning. In this era marked by Russia's war, we can no longer take the progress of liberty and human rights in Europe for granted. Fundamental rights and freedoms are under pressure on too many fronts. Therefore, if we want to show that despite repression and war, the power of democracy and the soul of Europe remain unbroken on our continent, then we have to stand up and fight for them. Let us keep this in mind as we prepare for the Reykjavik summit, building on all our valuable ideas and suggestions. And there are many floating around. You took a decision just these days. And I would like to focus on three crucial points for this summit. First, the summit should reaffirm our joint commitment to the core values of the Council of Europe. Or let me put it in another way. If the Council is to remain our common home, our common soul for European democracy and human rights, we have to fix the cracks in its walls, stop the erosion of its foundations, and make sure that all residents abide by the House rules. I'm aware of the fact that our 46 member countries have very different historic and cultural pasts. I also know that no legal system and no democracy is perfect. Thanks God, because no human being is perfect, because we are all different. But what we all wish for is to get better every day. Because there is not such single form or type of a perfect democracy. But what binds us all in the Council is our commitment to the rule of law and to the division of power, our pledge to protect our people's fundamental rights and daily freedoms. And that is what we have signed up to. So let me say loud and clear, all member states have to respect the European Convention on Human Rights and implement the Court of Human Rights judgments based on it. And it worries me deeply that for years the Turkish authorities have been ignoring the court's demands to release Osman Kavala, whose detention the court considers to be politically motivated. And yes, it was good that there has finally been a visit, but this is nothing to applaud about because Osman Kavala shouldn't be in prison. It's simply unacceptable for a member state of this Council to imprison someone for political reasons. That is why the Committee of Ministers has initiated infringement proceedings against Turkey. Co-rapporteurs of the Council have recently underlined this by the visit. And I'm reiterating our call for the Turkish authorities to release Osman Kavala and also to release Selahattin Demirtas and the others whom the court has also ruled to be unlawfully detained. We all as members of this Council have to respect this basic rule book. That is a legal obligation and no wish list. And that is what our citizens expect from us. This also applies, obviously, to every country in this room, also to my own country. And that is why Germany has been taking steps to fully adopt the Council of Europe's legal instrument protecting women and girls from violence. Because if we call on others to ratify or to comply with conventions, then obviously reservations from ourselves might be a bit biased. So therefore, when my government entered office just over a year ago, we said we would lift Germany's reservation to the Istanbul Convention. And that is what we have done. We will apply the Convention without restrictions as of next month. I invite all member states that have signed the Istanbul Convention to also ratify it very soon. And I think if a country in war, like Ukraine, could do it, then every other country in peace can do it as well. This also continues our work as part of the EU. At the same time, our ambition for the Reykjavik summit should not only be to reserve what the Council of Europe has achieved, as crucial as that might be. Together, we can not only refurbish our common European home of human rights and democracy, but also expand it with new rooms and more inhabitants. And that is my second point. Let us work together to adapt the Council and our democracy to a changing world. That means finally making the European Union's accession to the European Convention on Human Rights a reality, creating a common European human rights protection standard. Most importantly, however, the Council can help pave the way for a new generation of human rights. Democracy and human rights are based on universal values, but they are also constant works in progress, because our societies evolve and new technologies obviously emerge. Take the digital revolution that is transforming how we all shop, meet our friends, and go on a date, if they used to go on a date. How entire industries work, or how scientists predict storms and droughts. The internet, social media, and artificial intelligence have already made our lives so much better, but obviously they also bring new challenges and risk. We have seen that AI facial recognition can have racial bias that is used to target children with aggressive advertising, and that autocratic regimes are exploiting it to track down dissidents. That is why democratic governments, we, have to work together to protect human rights in the digital world. We cannot simply leave this to algorithms, to TikTok or Elon Musk. This is a political task. This is a democratic task. In the Council of Europe, we are working on a convention on the development, design, and application of AI systems. This convention can set a pan-European standard for human-centric and human rights-based AI, making sure, for example, that companies and governments are not spying on people by running their social media posts through AI analysis. Together, we can ensure that technology makes human rights stronger, not weaker, because technologies are there for human and not for industry or autocracies. That is why the German government is committed to working with you all to see this new convention adopted this year. And finally, there's a third point we should keep in mind: the outreach to that I would call neighbors and friends of the Council of Europe. When I traveled to another region, to Kazakhstan last year, I met again a young woman in her mid-20s who worked for an NGO and planned to establish a political party. And all of a sudden she said, "You are so lucky in Europe." And I was thinking, okay, what comes now? And then she said, "You're so lucky, you have the Council of Europe." And for a moment I was stopping and thinking again, with old prejudices, so is she talking about the EU or the Council? So I said, the Council of Europe. Yes, the Council of Europe. And said, why? Because you have an instrument to which your government has to relate. You have conventions where I, as an NGO, could say, you're not applying to the Istanbul Convention or to the Human Rights Convention, because you have a court where every citizen can go to. And I think this is also crucial in these times. There are so many people, especially people around the world, who are not arguing about democracy, human rights to be one geographical pattern, but who are saying, we would like to benefit from your experience, from your lessons from the past. And this morning, during my visit of the Court of Human Rights, I was shown what this right means the young lady in Kazakhstan was talking about. I entered this room of registers, and I mean, this is really interesting when you're talking about AI, and I saw this piles of posts on the table, and people going through all these papers, and some, we also get this as politicians in our offices, where you think, okay, this is a bit crazy, but they are going through every letter. Letters written on paper, some tabled in the internet, but also still letters written on a tiny sheet of paper. Because when you're in a prison and when you're political prisoners, obviously you do not have the best access to this court, to our court. So that any individual can initiate a complaint, and be it with a simple handwritten request scribbled on a postcard or even on a piece of toilet paper sent from a prison. This is, as simple as it is, what this soul of Europe stands also for. In many places around the world, people do not have this privilege, and we should remind ourselves to this every day. And that is why it's on us to stand by their side as they, around the world, strive for human rights when they seek peace and a better future for them and their children. The work of the Venice Commission is a beautiful example of how the values of the Council of Europe can have an impact around the world, even though, again, from the first hand, you would say the Venice Commission not having any real power. But the influence from the Venice Commission is maybe bigger than a big institution with a lot of money. Because with its advice on how to reform electoral laws and constitution, the Commission is a compass for democracy, guiding us and member states from no less than 5 continents all around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, we could go on, and you know it better than me about the hidden but so powerful tools of this Council of Europe. And it's up to us whether we use them or whether we leave them aside. It's our responsibility. We are the politicians of our times. When human lives are endangered, when human dignity is in jeopardy, national borders and sensitivities become irrelevant. That is how Elie Wiesel put it, reminding us to be watchful whenever human rights are violated. To us here in this plenary hall, these words might seem beautiful and aspirational, but to the boys and the girls in Kharkiv, to the 16-year-old who came back from Italy, to her home, to her destroyed home, because that is her European soil. This is their future. This is their trust. This is their destiny. For their sake and the sake of so many others, these words must be a concrete call on us to stand up to what this Council stands for: human rights and dignity of all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. We are not the German Bundestag, where you applaud after every second sentence, but I hope that you understand that the applause that you received at the end shows that we are proud that a former member of this assembly, now one of the leading politicians in Europe, is still a true advocate of the cause and role of the Council of Europe and its Parliamentary Assembly. Thank you very much. You have agreed to answer also questions of our members. I remind members that questions must be limited to 30 seconds and no more. I will first take the questions of the political groups, and then we see how much other questions we can take. First I call Madam Selin Böke from Turkey, and she speaks on behalf of the group of Socialists, Greens and Democrats. Selin.
Thank you. And dear Minister, on behalf of the Socialists, Democrats and Greens, I welcome you and welcome you back. And our Assembly realizes the very critical importance of the Reykjavik Summit. And in this regard, I'd like to ask you if you could further detail what you think are concrete and critical pillars of a new strategic vision that should be included in a political action plan that we hope would come out of the summit. And also which concrete steps you think should be taken to speed up the progress of the EU joining the Council of Europe conventions and instruments, and for giving the Council of Europe a structured role in the EU enlargement process, especially in light of the very depth that you put forth in your speech, in opening room in our refurbished family of values, not just of geography. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Celine. Madam Minister.
Well, on the first part of your question, I tried to outline it in my speech, but I tried to do it shorter and sharper now. Well, first of all, I think it's not about a vision, because it's about now. It's about these times. And the worst what could happen would be to say in 20 years' time, we should be this and this, because this is a perfect excuse for politicians why we cannot do it today and right now. So for me, the fourth summit is more about reality than a vision. And this is why, even though this isn't really physiological or really like out of the sphere, but the question of finance is so crucial, because you can have the greatest vision if you do not have the financing of an institution. And I was not here only as a parliamentarian, but back in time also as an intern. And I was in a division where my boss at those time wasn't sure whether she would get their next payment again. I mean, and if we have an institution where we believe this stands for democracy, human rights, and also rule of law, I think the employees of this house shouldn't wonder whether their payment is also in the future safe. And this counts for the Council of Europe, but also on the court. Because the court, I heard it today, gets, especially from certain countries, so many complaints that they hardly can handle it every day. And this is a call from me to other countries. If we do not raise our national, also the voluntary contribution, we will not fulfill this task. So my first goal for the summit is that we increase the budget of the council, but also of the court. The second point is, for me, I try to say it also in the speech, to really focus on the most crucial points. And this is the human rights violations. If we see cases of violation, a report is one thing, but acting afterwards, and I think we have seen in the last 11 months what the Council is capable for. To be united in expelling Russia, to be united on formulating some of this resolution, I would believe that we need it also for other countries, for other human rights violations. And the third part is about the new conventions. Institution is only as strong as much it keeps up to the pace of development. So the new resolutions, the new conventions, but also the new setup, for example, fighting climate crisis, the rights with regard to a safe and healthy environment. This is not a nice-to-have topic. This is a core security topic. So this is also the third part for me for the next summit, to really focus on the new human rights as a new generation.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Next question comes from Ingrid Skau from Norway, and Ingrid is speaking on behalf of the EPP group. Ingrid.
Thank you. And Madam Minister, initially I was going to ask your view on a special tribunal to prosecute Russia's aggression in Ukraine. But I understand that you are in agreement with our assembly that a tribunal must be set up. I will therefore ask what your position is on supplying Ukraine with Leopard 2 tanks. Freedom and democracy for Ukraine is paramount. I understand you are not against other countries delivering Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine, but Germany has been urged to send its own. Will you?
Thank you, Ingrid. Madam Minister.
Well, I think my position on this is very clear. You could hear it on television the last 2 days. But because I'm in the Council of Europe, and this is not to hide away from an answer, because you can just read the answer in the news, obviously Ukraine needs more military support, but not only by one country like mine or the US, by all of us. We can fight this war only together. This is about our common European peace order, and this is why we are calling, with regard to tanks and other support, for a big international group. But obviously the Council of Europe is not delivering tanks, and I would say thanks God, because we don't have to duplicate things. This institution is about bringing accountability and justice. And this is why also, to your question here, I would like to answer with accountability. This war is not only led by military action from Russia. This war from Russia against Ukraine, against the European peace order, also attacks our justice system. It attacks the institution like the Council of Europe. It attacks the international criminal law. So I, speaking here as a foreign minister of Germany, but also as a European, yes, we have to do more military aid, But we definitely have to do more also on humanitarian aid, on winter help, on accountability, on the question about the missing children. Nobody is speaking about it because we do not have any facts about it. So what I'm saying here is we keep up with our military support, but we will definitely keep on going and on call on others with the humanitarian support, with the stabilization, and especially with the accountability. And I believe that the Council of Europe, together with the court, can play a crucial role, together also with the International Criminal Court on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Next, I call Madam Petra Stine from the Netherlands, and Petra speaks on behalf of the ALDE group. Petra.
Minister, thank you very much. On behalf of the ALDE group, I would like to compliment you for your leadership on feminist foreign policy. Because all of us know that as long as half of the population lacks in opportunities to getting good education, good healthcare, good job opportunities, and to participate in the political arena without being attacked or the misogyny all of us know many women get, we don't have human security. But, Madam Minister, action speaks louder than words. So on behalf of the ALDE group, we really would like to know how are you going to bring this leadership into practice? Not only for the people inside of Europe, but also for the people in Iran. We have large Iranian diaspora in many of our cities, and also for the people in Ukraine. We just had a report adapted on sexual violence in conflict situations. So yes, wonderful that you want to have this tribunal, but how can we ensure that also accountability will take place on these horrible acts of sexual forms of violence against women, girls, men and boys? Thank you.
Thank you, Petra. Madam Minister.
Thank you for this important question, because words only matter when they come into practice. However, I would say speaking out about these crimes is also crucial, because when we remember with regard to the Balkan War, and we heard for many those times that rape actually happens in war. And I still hear that around the world. When I was in Ethiopia, why are you talking about rape? Rape is just normal in a war. But speaking out back then, the brave women in Bosnia and in many, many other countries of the Balkans saying this is not normal. And we had to fight in front of the International Criminal Court, which was not even established those times, that rape and sexual violence is actually a crime, and you cannot just count it under war crimes. This was a big, big fight, and I'm making this curve because we are not finally there, also not with the International Criminal Court. When I was in Den Haag, for example, I did not only speak about the special tribunal, but I spoke also on the need to develop further the accountability of these crimes. We had one of the cases against IS fighters in Germany, also against Yazidi women. And what we have seen in these cases, and this is why I'm always talking about my country and other European countries as well, that it's so much easier also for a prosecutor in Germany to bring the complaints of terrorism in front of a court, because even in our division. They have a division on terrorism, but they do not have a division on sexual violence crimes in war. So coming back to your question, we have to look at our individual national cases, how we can strengthen the law there. We have to work on the ICC, that they also bring these cases to justice. We have to, with regard to Iran, this is why I was lobbying so much for the Human Rights Council resolution, that we have investigation in Iran. Obviously, nobody can go there, but same as in Ukraine. We have to collect the evidence now, maybe even from outside. We have to set up a special prosecution division that at some point, like with the Yazidi women, back in time, we collect the evidence and we bring the perpetrators to justice in the name of the victims. So it's a lot of work, again, on the judicial part, but naming them today is the first step that accountability comes into place at some point, and this means also naming the Revolutionary Guards as what they are. I believe they are terrorizing their own citizen in Iran, so obviously they are a terrorist organization. So far, we are not clear whether we have the legal ground that we can put them under the sanction regime also in the European Union. This is more than true, because we had a legal debate yesterday in the parliament, and this is a German colleague. We discussed it also in our Committee on Foreign Affairs, because the sanction regime of the terrorist was set up for the 9/11 case. So yesterday, the colleagues from France, from the Netherlands, and myself, we called on the legal service of the European Union to identify whether and how this will be possible, because we shouldn't forget, our strongest power is that the people in Europe believe and have the trust in the rule of law. And that means even in the most difficult times, like setting up a sanction regime, this has to be based on the rule of law, that it can also prevail at the end in front of the court. And therefore, sometimes it takes time, but in the end, the trust in the rule of law is the most important one. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Now I call on Chris Chope from the United Kingdom, and Chris speaks on behalf of the European Conservative Group. You have the floor, Chris.
Madam Minister, although you don't seem to recognise it, today you have made the most powerful and eloquent case for Germany to supply Leopard tanks to Ukraine. Germany's refusal of these essential resources to Ukraine is prolonging the war and emboldening Putin. What can we do to help convert your generous words about Ukraine into actions by your government? If the United Kingdom Parliament can be united across all parties on this, why can't the German government and Parliament?
Mr. Minister.
Well, I give the same answer as I did yesterday in the Foreign Affairs Ministers' meeting. Because my answer is that finger pointing at each other doesn't bring peace and freedom to Ukraine. If we start or continue this game to finger point at others because it's more convenient for oneself, then Russia and Putin wins. And this is why I'm personally doing the opposite. And this is why, as a democratic politician in my country, where we have a government with different actors, we are discussing things and we are taking action jointly together with other partners. And this is why I'm not calling now on your country, on other countries, asking, so why haven't the Howitzers 2000 been delivered when Netherlands and Germany delivered them? Or why did it take so long that one country delivers now Bradley, when others have delivered already tanks? This ends nowhere. This ends only in dividing Europe. And therefore, I've said already in the last days, yes, we have to do more to defend Ukraine. Yes, we have to do more also on tanks. But the most important and the crucial part is that we do it together and that we do not do the blame game in Europe, because we are fighting a war against Russia and not against each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Now, the last speaker on behalf of the political groups is Mr. George Katrougalis from Greece, and he speaks on behalf of the United European Left. George?
Madam Minister, you are a politician of principles. That's why I want your personal position on two issues. Julian Assange, in the past, you had endorsed our resolution for his immediate release. Where do you stand now? Second, German arms export to Turkey, a country which has now occupation forces to 3 other countries, Syria, Iraq, Cyprus. Do you find this compatible with the EU common position of 2008, which forbids military sale to countries which affect regional stability or do not comply with their international commitments?
Thank you. Madam Minister?
Well, for the first part, my position has been, when I was in opposition and also when I'm a foreign minister, that obviously as a European country, every European country, be it UK or be it Germany or be it Poland, our action has to be in line with the judgments of the courts of human rights, and this calls for Julian Assange case as it counts for every other case. And with regard to weapons delivery, we have outlines in Germany. We have also European regulation on arms delivery. I think also there we are on a crucial point. We call it Zeitenwende in Germany. Your colleagues before you are calling for common weapon delivery. This means also we have to realize that we need a common European weapon production, because what we have seen right now that we are aligned in NATO treaty and EU treaty, but obviously with regard to our military equipment, we are not so much aligned, because when I take the example of the Panzer howitzers, for example, it's the same production, but we realize in Ukraine that obviously the munition doesn't work compatible between the two systems. So when I'm talking about regulation on military equipment export, I think this is not a national individual decision anymore. This has to be a European question. We have the common standpoint of the European partners, but I believe if we move forward also on the question of deterrence and securing peace in Europe, we have to combine not only our military equipment but also our export roles. So far, because you mentioned countries and actions in the past, we have the clear guidelines in Germany that with regard to the delivery of weapons in areas of conflict, of massive human rights violation, anyhow it's always a single decision with every case, but that we are not delivering in these areas, and this is why we have taken some of the actions in the past. Obviously, with regard to Ukraine, we are underlining right now, if this is a question of self-defense with regard to Article 51 of the UN Charter, we are also delivering weapons now to Ukraine, even though this is a conflict area.
Thank you, Madam Minister. We have run out of time, but I would allow four more questions. We combine them, and then you have a few seconds left to answer them, because the Holocaust commemoration is also waiting. So I will now give the floor to Mr. Rubinian, Mr. Kolatyan, Madam Eda Gichaler, and Mr. Goncharenko. Mr. Rubinian from Armenia, 30 seconds.
Thank you. Madam Minister, last week the European Parliament adopted a resolution that condemns the blockade of Nagorno-Karabakh by Azerbaijan. The European Parliament urged the European Union to be actively involved and ensure that the people of Nagorno-Karabakh are no longer held under siege. Madam Minister, as an EU member state, what does the government of Germany intend to do in this situation? Thank you.
Thank you, Ruben. Titus Kolatyan from Romania.
Madam Minister, as you know, all of us worked hard in our countries, including in my own, Romania, to strongly support Ukraine while facing the aggression coming from Russia. In the same time, in some member states, we have accumulated during the years and during the past year an increasing concern, and now a huge disappointing seeing the bad treatment granted to the national minorities in this country, including to the Romanian national minority. Law on education, the recent law on minorities, and now violation of freedom of religion. My question is very simple. What is the German government assessment and position while discussing about this subject, and also taking into account that this is a political criteria for EU accession and European standards in the Council of Europe? Thank you.
Now I give the floor to Madam Andrea Eder Gichaler from Austria. 30 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. President. Liebe Frau Außenministerin, Sie waren ja letzte Woche in Den Haag beim Internationalen Gerichtshof, und da haben Sie auch neben dem Sondertribunal gesagt, dass es Ihnen ein großes Anliegen ist, die verschleppten Kinder aus Ukraine wieder zurückzubekommen. Ja? Welche Maßnahmen setzt Deutschland dafür, dass diese Kinder wieder zurück zu ihren Eltern kommen?
Danke sehr. And the last 30 seconds go to our good colleague Alexei Goncharenko from Ukraine.
Thank you. My colleagues are telling you thanks, and I want to tell you thanks. I want to ask you to say directly, Council of Europe, it's about peace and justice, that's very important. But peace and justice today has one name, Leopard. So please tell us directly, yes or no, and when. Dankeschön.
Mr. Minister, I told you that we have run out of time, but please do an effort to answer these 4 different questions.
Well, thanks a lot for all your questions and also for the emotion, especially when you're directly not only affected, but your whole family, your whole friends are living in Ukraine and you're facing death every day. I totally understand this. So I also understand your question, but my discussion, first of all, peace is not only on tanks, even though this is a crucial question. This is why we are debating it intensively also in my government, and this is why we have delivered tanks. Gepard, Marders, battled vehicles, which others are deciding right now. But this is also about air defense. Because this is why I have been talking about Kharkiv here. And I've experienced over the last months, and I would like to share this with you to show that it's not this simple answer. If we would deliver Leos, if we would deliver tanks and the war is over. We had this discussion also in the beginning. If we would just have an oil embargo, then this war would be over. But unfortunately not, because what Putin is doing is so irrational. This is what we have to understand. This is not a logic. If we do one step, then the other step would follow. And this makes it so complicated for us. So I totally support. We need everything that Ukraine can defend your country, your citizens, your children, your grandparents. And you defend also our European peace order. So obviously it needs more military equipment, be it with regard to tanks, be it with regard to air defense, be it with regard with munition. But however, we have to also understand, unfortunately, that this probably won't prevent that the war is going on. So we need all the other factors as well. And this is why my plea to you is not because I want to bypass the military question, but we need every part of support, humanitarian, financial, and especially aid support right now, because the strategy is also from Putin in Kharkiv. It's not killing people only by rockets. They want to freeze people to death. I've been visiting one of these shelters, but it needs way more shelters. It needs demining projects. So this is also something every country can do. My country, your countries. And this is really my plea here. Let's fight about or discuss about tanks, and we will give an answer. I can promise you this. But let's not forget about the other tasks. They are at least as important as the military support, also in the future when we are talking about reconstruction. So with regard to the question from the Austrian colleague, thank you for bringing this up, the deportation of the children, because in this topic we don't even have figures. The International Committee of the Red Cross is not capable of going to eastern Ukraine. This is also my argumentation why I'm saying that we need more military support to free these areas. We don't know about the children. We don't know about the families in eastern Ukraine. And this is why I'm also saying to those who say you should just try harder with diplomacy and speak nice to Putin, that this is not possible. Because if he would be ready for diplomacy, the first thing would be that he would allow humanitarian access to eastern Ukraine, that he would allow to treat not only soldiers, but also children and family in eastern Ukraine. But obviously he's not ready to do this. To answer your question, first thing is again to speak about it. I've heard from many, don't speak about it because we don't have secured numbers. Well, obviously we don't know whether they are thousands or 10,000s of children. But even if it's only 100, we have to care for every single child. These are more than war crimes if you deport a child to another country and if you give it free to adoption. So we look together with also the Council of Europe, with the Criminal Court, together with the EU actors to trace the tracks. Where did the children go? What can we go to get them back to their country, to bring those to justice who commit these kind of crimes, to support the Ukrainians in their efforts to prevent that further children are being deported, because this is based also on fake news in eastern Ukraine. So these are tiny steps, but I think the most important one is to not be silent on this matter because we are not sure how big these war crimes are. The question with regard to Romania, and I'm sorry that maybe I didn't get it right. What I understood was minority rights in Ukraine was your question. We are also discussing this with Hungary and other countries in the Foreign Ministers' Council of the EU. Obviously, because we are not only a geographical Europe, but we are a common Europe of values, be it in the Council of Europe and be it in the EU. We said, when we said about the membership of the European Union, that yes, Ukraine belongs to the EU, but they have to fulfill all the European laws and convention and treaties. And I find it quite impressive that in a time of war, they ratified, as I said before, the Istanbul Convention. They are working on so many legal aspects within their national constitutions and national law, and this counts obviously also to minority rights. So this is also work we are doing with the Council of Europe, but also with the EU. And the Armenia question, thank you that you brought up this topic, showing that unfortunately we are not only looking at a Russian war in Ukraine, but that we see other regional conflicts which we have to pay attention. This is also the situation with regard to the blockade of Lajin corridor. And yesterday we decided as a European Union to have an EU mission in Armenia, but obviously this mission only makes sense if there's also access from Azerbaijan side. So you ask, what are we doing there? First and most important, that also this mission can work from Azerbaijani side to monitor the humanitarian situation in the conflict area and to bring also there justice to the people in the region. Thank you very much for this exchange. Thank you also very much for this discussion. It shows what we are, a democracy and democratic countries where everybody can have their own and free opinion, but the most important is to listen to the others, to be ready to see it from their side of view. So thank you very much. There was a really fruitful exchange also for myself. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Madam Minister. We now are going, I invite you all to go outside because there will be the commemoration of the Holocaust. Before leaving the room, I inform you that I must remind you that the vote is still in progress to elect 2 judges to the European Court of Human Rights. The poll will close at 3 o'clock. Those who have not yet voted should still do so on the Skytel online voting system. The sitting is adjourned.